The US government funded the Panama Papers expose with the intention of attacking Russia and its president. Millions of documents were leaked with a huge list of shady VIP tax arrangements. Well, WikiLeaks says the attack on President Putin was produced by an American organisation it describes as having done good work in the past, but questions its US government funding and the reasons for it. The group being highlighted by WikiLeaks is called the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. It says it received the Panama Papers documents from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Well, the ICIJ is a non-profit organisation. Its website lists the group's aim as bringing in journalists from different countries. Among their benefactors is the billionaire George Soros' Open Society Foundation. The American business magnate is one of the richest people in the world and has been one busy billionaire too. Over the years, he's been criticised, though, for using his wealth to allegedly subvert political systems in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Forbes accused him in 2011 of bankrolling his own personal foreign policy. Well, in an interview with RT, WikiLeaks calls for the Panama Papers to be made public and released in full.
They should be available to the general public in such a manner so everybody, not just the group of journalists working directly on the data, can search it. I do have an understanding that they can delay it for a certain time to maximize the impact, but in the end, it should be available to the general public. That's the new way. That's the way that WikiLeaks has presented, and it's highly appreciated by the general public.
I should say that Kristin Hrafnsson, who is normally the spokesperson for WikiLeaks, was also speaking in his capacity as co-founder of the Icelandic Center for Investigative Journalism, and he was keen to emphasize that WikiLeaks pioneered this idea of staggering the publication of leaked information to get maximum impact. But I think what concerns him is that this center, which gets its funding from elements within the American state so closely allied to power in America, is something of concern. Indeed, it also means that it will be filtered by those in power and those with preconceptions already about the validity of US power to make the world a better place.
And you can watch that interview with the WikiLeaks spokesperson in full later today on Going Underground here on RT. Well, joining me now live from Brussels, former MI5 agent Annie Machon to discuss this story a bit further. Good evening to you, Annie. So what do you make of this, and are you surprised that WikiLeaks suspects the Panama Papers expose to basically be a Washington-funded move against Russia?
I'm not particularly surprised. I have to say that when I first saw the story break in The Guardian yesterday, I immediately was quite suspicious because the headline story was about Putin. And yet, in fact, none of the Panama Papers talk about Vladimir Putin. He hasn't put his name to anything. And I think, in a way, the story is sort of slightly run out of the control of the journalists who broke it, because they still, in The Guardian, have this sort of guide to how to hide your billions offshore, and that's a video about Putin and his family and his friends. But actually, the major stories for most other countries are the politicians who appear to have offshore stashes of cash, who are leading their countries and saying we're going to fight tax evasion, tax avoidance. So, for example, in Iceland, we've seen the Prime Minister already have to resign. In the UK, we have David Cameron under attack for having some sort of trust fund that his father set up. And now he's denying that his family benefits from it now, but who knows? So it's interesting that the press seem to have a certain agenda. Certain bits of the press seem to have a certain agenda. And yet, actually, the interest is in potential collusion, corruption or whatever of their leaders in whichever individual country we're talking about. And that's probably right.
Is it surprising, Annie, that there wasn't any particular mention about American business or individuals so far? I mean, there are an awful lot of documents to be released, but so far, no Americans.
Indeed it is, I think. This trove of information apparently contains 11.5 million documents, over 2 terabytes of information, and yet only, I think it's about 149 or 150 have been released to date. Now, this is incredibly frustrating. I do agree with Kristin Hrafnsson, from the WikiLeaks spokesperson, who said that, you know, actually it'd be nice to have all the information out there so that everyone could research what's going on within their own countries, within their own democracies. And that's the WikiLeaks model. So I do see that. I also understand the fact that the journalistic organisations concerned want to maximise the impact. And they should. But you can maximise it and then minimise it by dragging it out too long. We saw this with the Edward Snowden disclosures, you know, where to this day, I think about 1 or 2% of his documents have been released. You know, organisations need to make a splash, and then they need to put the information out there for everyone to research. That is crowdsourcing journalism, it's crowdsourcing democracy, it's crowdsourcing individual interest in certain subjects. And that's what we need today.
Well, talking about sort of crowdfunding individual interests, we do know that one of the main benefactors behind the group which released the files is billionaire George Soros, isn't it? He's been very critical of Russian foreign policy also. Should we be wary of this, do you think?
I think it's always worth taking a step back from whatever you read in the media, whatever media you're reading as well, and saying, well, who's funding this? What are the corporate interests? What are the social interests behind what is being published in this particular outlet? What's being recorded in this particular outlet? I mean, RT gets slated for that. And I think that most Western outlets could also be slated for the same reasons. The BBC is state-funded, Fox News is corporate-funded. I mean, there's always going to be some sort of agenda behind the editorial decisions made on any medium. So, yes, I think that's also why a lot of the younger generations, the millennials, so-called millennials, tend to cherry-pick different stories from different outlets, and I think they're right to do so, to get a balanced view of what might be going on out there.
OK, Annie, we'll leave it there, but thanks very much for coming on to RT this evening. That was former British intelligence agent Annie Machon. Thank you.